I still remember the morning light that slipped through the curtains, soft, golden, almost peaceful. It should have been a normal day, but somehow I knew it wasn't. There was a strange kind of excitement in the house, the kind that didn't include me. Mom's laughter floated from the kitchen. It was warm, bright, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. I walked out of my room, half asleep, still brushing my hair back, and stopped when I heard my dad's voice. "We're proud of you, Daniel. You've earned this." I froze. My brother's name. The way Dad said it, with pride, with joy, hit me harder than I expected. I peeked around the corner and saw them sitting together at the dining table. Mom had her hand on Daniel's shoulder, her face glowing with pride. And on the table was a document. Dad was signing something. "A bank transfer slip? $300,000, he said proudly. "For your business. We believe in you, son." 300,000. The number echoed in my head over and over again, like a cruel joke. Mom reached out, hugging Daniel like he had just changed the world. "Finally," she said, "someone in this family who knows what success looks like." I don't think they saw me standing there. Or maybe they did, and it didn't matter. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice just wouldn't come out. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was that one word, believe. They had never said that to me, not once. I tried to smile when Daniel looked up and noticed me. "Oh, hey," he said casually. "Guess who's finally getting his own office?" Mom laughed. "He deserves it. He's worked hard." Her words stung. Not because they weren't true, but because they erased everything I'd ever done. All those late nights, all those part-time jobs, all the silent efforts just to keep moving forward. They vanished in an instant. I swallowed hard. "That's great," I said quietly. Dad looked at me for the first time that morning. His expression changed, from proud to impatient. "You should take notes from your brother," he said. "He has goals. You're still figuring things out." Still figuring things out. That's what they always said. Even when I was working double shifts. Even when I was paying rent without asking them for a cent. I wanted to tell them that not everyone's success looks the same. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Because in their eyes, I'd already failed. That night, I sat in my room staring at my phone. I thought about calling a friend, going out, pretending I didn't care. But my chest felt heavy, like someone had pressed a weight against it. Every word from that morning replayed in my head. "We believe in you, Daniel. You've earned this. Finally, someone who knows what success looks like." I didn't cry, not then. I just sat in silence, listening to the hum of the streetlights outside, wondering when I stopped being enough for them. The next day, I tried acting normal. I congratulated Daniel again before he left. He hugged me quickly, that kind of fake polite hug that says, "I'm doing this because I have to." "Don't worry," he said with a smirk. "Maybe once I make it big, I'll hire you." He laughed. Mom laughed. Even Dad smiled. I laughed too, but my voice cracked halfway through. When they left the room, I stood there alone. The laughter faded, and what filled the space instead was silence, the kind that wraps around you like cold air. That was the day something inside me changed. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like a quiet, invisible heartbreak. The kind that doesn't make noise but leaves scars deep enough to stay forever. I walked back to my room, looked around at the few things I owned, the books I'd bought secondhand, the laptop with a cracked screen, the framed photo of my family from years ago. We were smiling in that photo. We looked happy, back when love didn't have a price tag. I took the frame off the shelf and placed it face down. That small action, as simple as it was, felt like closing a door. Because deep down I knew that morning wasn't just about money. It was about choice. And they chose him, over me. That night I couldn't sleep. Every thought felt like a storm. Why wasn't I good enough? Why did their pride only belong to him? The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. And as I stared at the ceiling, I whispered to myself, a promise, not of revenge, but of change. "One day," I said softly, "I'll stop needing their approval." It wasn't anger. It was awakening. And though I didn't know it then, that was the day I began to let go of their expectations, their judgments, and the version of me they refused to see. It was the day they chose him, and the day I started choosing myself. Silence has a strange way of speaking, louder than words ever could. After that day, our home felt like a museum of memories, familiar, but empty. I'd pass by my parents in the hallway, and the only sounds were footsteps, distant and cold. They stopped asking how my day was. I stopped telling them. It wasn't a fight that tore us apart, it was the quiet. The kind of quiet that grows roots, settles deep, and becomes a part of your life before you even notice. A week later, Daniel's business launch became the new family obsession. Every dinner conversation circled around him, his progress, his plans, his potential. And there I was, sitting across the table, a ghost in my own house. I'd nod when they spoke, smile when expected, and disappear to my room the moment plates were cleared. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and it was easier to pretend they didn't. The calls from Mom stopped first. Then the texts. Then one day I realized I hadn't spoken to her in 2 months. It's funny how distance doesn't always need miles. Sometimes it just takes one conversation that never happened. I'd scroll through old photos of us, birthdays, vacations, random Sunday dinners, and wonder if those moments ever meant as much to them as they did to me. Did they ever look at me and feel proud? Or was I always the one they quietly wished turned out different? The day I moved out, there were no tears, no arguments, just an exchange of words that felt rehearsed. "You don't have to go," Mom said softly, avoiding eye contact. "I know," I replied, "but I think I should." Dad stood behind her, his arms crossed, saying nothing. That silence, his silence, and said everything. I carried 2 suitcases and a box of books to my car. No one came out to see me off. The driveway felt longer that day, the air heavier, and when I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, a mix of sadness and relief. It wasn't freedom I felt. It was the slow, painful beginning of it. The first few weeks alone were the hardest. I'd wake up and almost reach for my phone to call them, only to stop midair, remembering why I couldn't. The silence in my new apartment felt different, not cold this time, but honest. It's strange. When you cut ties with people you love, your heart doesn't immediately understand the decision your mind made. It keeps waiting, waiting for a text that won't come. A message that says, "We're sorry. We were wrong." But that message never came. Days turned into months. I built a routine: work, meals, quiet nights. I found comfort in small things: the hum of the kettle, the sound of rain against my window, the stillness of not having to prove myself anymore. For the first time, I didn't need to explain who I was, or what I was doing with my life. There was no audience waiting to judge me, just me trying to rebuild. Sometimes I'd see Daniel's posts online: new office, new car, new headlines. The comments were full of praise. "So proud of you. You're going places!" I'd stare at those posts longer than I should, not out of jealousy, but out of quiet curiosity. Did he ever think of me? Did he ever wonder what our parents' pride cost me? I doubted it. Then one night, months later, I got a call from Mom. I almost didn't answer, but my thumb betrayed me. "Hey," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's been a while." We talked, or rather she talked. About Daniel, about the house, about everything except what mattered. When she finally paused, I asked, "Do you ever think about what happened?" There was silence on the other end, a silence so long I thought she'd hung up. "We did what we thought was right," she finally said. And that was it. No apology, no realization, just the same wall standing between us. I didn't cry this time. I just listened. And when she said goodbye, I whispered, "Take care," knowing deep down that I'd finally let go. That night, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger, just acceptance. Some families never understand your worth, not because you don't have any, but because they only measure it in ways that fit their comfort. And I was done trying to fit. The distance between us wasn't a punishment anymore. It was peace. Quiet, steady, unshakable peace. I'd lost their approval, but I'd found myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of love I'd been searching for all along. There's a strange ache that comes with being forgotten. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. Like an empty chair at a dinner table that no one bothers to notice anymore. At first, I thought time would heal it. That maybe after a few weeks, I'd stop checking my phone. Stop glancing at my messages, waiting for their names to appear. But days turned into months, and silence turned into a habit. No birthdays calls, no "how are you" texts, nothing. It was as if I'd been erased, not from their lives, but from their memory. In the beginning, I filled my days with noise, work, errands, late-night shows, anything to drown out the quiet. But silence has a way of finding you, no matter how loud your distractions are. It would find me at 2 a.m., when the city outside was asleep, and all I could hear was the soft hum of my own thoughts whispering, "Maybe they were right about you." Those words became a ghost that followed me everywhere. To work, to the grocery store, to every lonely dinner I ate in front of the TV. I started believing them. Believing that maybe I was the failure they said I was. Some nights, I'd scroll through family pictures online. There they were, smiling, together, perfect, as if I had never existed, and every photo felt like a quiet reminder I had been replaced. That realization cut deeper than anger, because it wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was invisibility. And being invisible hurts in a way that words can't describe. I remember one rainy evening, sitting by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. There was something comforting about their fall, how they'd slide, merge, and eventually disappear. I wondered if that's what happened to people like me. We slip away, merge into the background, and vanish from the story altogether. That night, I cried for the first time in months. Not out of sadness, but out of release. It felt like I was letting go of something heavy, the need to be seen. The days that followed were quiet, but different. I began noticing the world again, the smell of coffee in the morning, the warmth of sunlight through my small kitchen window, the sound of my own laughter when I watched an old movie alone. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't living for their approval. I was living for peace. There were still bad days, days when memories hit like waves, and I'd wonder if maybe I'd made a mistake by leaving. But then I'd remember the silence, the way they looked at me, not as a person, but as a disappointment. And suddenly, the loneliness didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like freedom. One evening after work, I found myself walking past a bookstore. Inside, a small "Help Wanted" sign hung by the window. Something about that moment pulled me in. I applied on impulse, not because I needed the money, but because I needed something that felt alive again. 2 weeks later, I was surrounded by shelves full of stories, each one written by someone who had lived through heartbreak, loss, or rebirth. And as I stacked books, I realized I wasn't the only one who had been forgotten. I was just one story among millions, trying to find meaning again. People started noticing me, customers, coworkers, strangers who smiled when I greeted them. Small interactions that reminded me I still existed, that maybe I still mattered. And slowly, the weight began to lift. Not all at once, but piece by piece. One night, as I closed the store and turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For the first time, I didn't see someone unwanted. I saw someone surviving. Someone learning to love the person they'd become without needing permission. It hit me then. Being forgotten isn't the end. It's the space where you get to remember yourself. I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, the air cool, the night quiet. And for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't scare me. It felt peaceful, because now it wasn't the sound of absence, it was the sound of healing. Life didn't change overnight. It never does. But one day I woke up and realized something. I hadn't thought about them in weeks. No late-night what-ifs, no scrolling through old pictures. Just peace. That was the first victory. Small, but powerful. Work at the bookstore became more than a job. It became therapy. Each story I shelved was a reminder that pain could be turned into something beautiful. Each customer who smiled at me felt like a quiet validation. I still belong somewhere. One evening, an elderly man came in looking for a rare poetry book. When I helped him find it, he said, "You have a kind way about you. People notice that, even if you don't think they do." I smiled, but that sentence stayed with me all night. For so long, I believed no one saw me. But maybe. I'd just been standing in the wrong place, waiting for the wrong people to notice. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't care. For the first time, I was earning something that was mine. My effort, my hours, my worth. At home, I started writing again. Short reflections, fragments of thoughts that had been buried for years. They weren't meant for anyone to read. They were just for me. My way of piecing together the parts of myself that had been broken. And with every page, the heaviness inside me began to lift. Slowly, life became full again. Not loud, not glamorous, but whole. Morning walks replaced sleepless nights. Cooking simple meals felt like art. Evenings were for tea, soft music, and peace. I started smiling more, not because life was perfect, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. Then, one afternoon, my manager called me into her office. She smiled and said, "You've been doing great. How do you feel about managing the store when I'm away next month?" My heart raced. It wasn't a promotion, it wasn't money, it was trust. Something I hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. I nodded and said, "I'd love to." When I left her office, I sat in the back room for a while, just breathing. That simple moment felt bigger than any amount of approval I'd ever begged for. Because this time, I hadn't been given anything. I'd earned it. Days began to flow differently after that. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped looking for their names in my inbox. Instead, I filled my days with purpose, with the quiet satisfaction of building something on my own terms. And people started noticing. Regular customers remembered my name. A local blogger wrote about the bookstore, mentioning the warm, thoughtful manager who always finds you the right book. When I read that line, I smiled to myself. That manager was me. A person I never thought I could become. Still, late at night, there were moments when the past tried to whisper back. A song would play. A memory would surface. For a second, I'd feel that familiar sting. The longing, the ache of being forgotten. But now those moments didn't drown me. They reminded me of how far I'd come. Pain had once been my language. Now it was my story. One evening, I stayed after closing to reorganize the shelves. When I turned off the lights, the reflection in the glass door caught me off guard again. But this time, I saw someone completely different. Someone who had survived heartbreak without bitterness. Someone who had built a life from the pieces others threw away. The kind of person my parents never thought I'd become. As I walked home that night, the city lights shimmered around me. Bright, alive, almost celebratory. And in that glow, I realized something profound. Success doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it whispers, softly, steadily, until one day, you realize it's been singing your name all along. That was the night I stopped chasing validation. Because I'd found something stronger, self-respect. And once you find that, no one can take it from you again. I used to think silence meant weakness, that not speaking, not defending myself was the same as giving up. But over time, I learned something else. Silence can be a statement, a boundary, a quiet revolution, and sometimes it's the loudest thing you can say. Months turned into a year, and the distance between me and my family stretched like a coastline. No messages, no calls, no apologies, just silence and long, deep, and unbroken. But slowly, that silence began to echo back. One Sunday afternoon, while scrolling through social media, I saw a family picture. Same dining table, same smiles. But something was different. The light behind their eyes was gone. They looked happy, but it was the kind of happiness that felt rehearsed. And there was Daniel, the golden child, the pride of the family. His smile looked stiff, his eyes tired. It was a small detail, but it told a story I didn't need words to understand. Their world wasn't as perfect anymore. A few weeks later, I got a text. From Dad, just 5 words. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at it for minutes. My heart wanted to respond, but my mind whispered, not yet. So I didn't. I didn't ignore it out of anger. I ignored it out of peace. Because for once, I wasn't reacting from pain. I was protecting my peace, the one I'd fought too hard to earn. Time went on. Through a friend of a friend, I heard things. Daniel's business had slowed down. A few bad deals, a few broken promises. The same people who once called him brilliant were now calling him reckless. And my parents? They'd grown quieter online. No more lavish posts, no more proud captions, just silence. The same silence they gave me. It's funny how life always finds a way to balance the noise. But I didn't celebrate their downfall. There was no joy in knowing they were hurting, only understanding. Because pain, no matter who feels it, has a way of humbling people. And in that humbling, I hoped they'd finally understand what I had been trying to say all along, that love without fairness isn't love at all. One evening, while locking up the bookstore, I saw a middle-aged woman struggling with the door. I helped her, smiled, and she said, "You remind me of my daughter. We haven't spoken in years. I think of her every day." Her eyes watered as she left, and I stood there frozen, because in that stranger's voice I heard my mother's silence. That night I sat on my balcony watching the city breathe, and for the first time I felt it. Not the pain of being forgotten, but the quiet power of being missed. Regret doesn't always arrive with apologies. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence. In the messages never sent, the dinners that feel emptier, the smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. And while they wrestled with their regret, I found peace in mine, because I no longer needed closure from them. I had given it to myself. Days grew brighter. The bookstore flourished. I started hosting small reading nights, and people came, not just for books, but for the warmth that filled the room. Every story shared, every laugh exchanged was a quiet reminder. I had created something beautiful out of all that pain. And deep down, I knew. Somewhere they'd heard the echo of that silence too. The silence that once broke me was now the proof that I had healed. One morning, I received a letter, handwritten, no return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Mom. My hands trembled as I opened it. I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll ever forgive us. But not a day goes by that I don't think about you. The house feels empty. We thought we were doing what was best. We were wrong. Tears fell before I reached the end. It wasn't an apology I'd imagined, but it was one that felt real. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my journal, not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that silence had done what words never could. That night, I looked out at the skyline, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: closure. No confrontation. No shouting. Just peace. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean distance. Sometimes it's the only way to make people finally listen. It started quietly, like the faint sound of glass beginning to crack. You don't notice it at first. Not until it spreads, slow and sharp, across everything you thought was solid. For months, I'd learned not to check in. Not to care. I'd muted their numbers, ignored their messages, and built my peace one silent day at a time. But peace has a strange way of bringing truth to your doorstep, even when you're not looking for it. It was a Tuesday morning when an old neighbor called me by accident. Or maybe fate had its own plans. Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Have you heard about your brother?" I froze. My first instinct was to hang up. But then she said it, those words that cracked open the calm I had built. "They say his business isn't doing so well. People are talking." I didn't reply. I just stood there, listening to my heartbeat echo through the silence. For years, my parents had built him into their version of perfection, the golden son with the golden future. Every family gathering was a celebration of him. Every compliment, every proud smile, every sacrifice poured into his name. And now the whispers had begun. At first, it was just about missed deadlines, delayed payments, an employee or two quitting. Then came the rumors: shady deals, unpaid loans, investors pulling out. My mother used to call me every Sunday, her tone bright and dismissive. "You wouldn't understand how hard it is to manage real success." Now she didn't call at all. My father, who used to brag about his son's six-figure business, had grown quieter too. The world they had built around him was starting to crumble, not with an explosion, but with slow, painful cracks. One evening, I saw my father's name flash on my phone for the first time in over a year. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. No message. No explanation. I sat there, staring at the phone, remembering the day they called me useless, the day they told me I lacked direction. I had left their house with nothing but a small bag and a heart that felt like it had been thrown away. Now, for the first time, they were the ones losing control. News travels fast in small circles. I heard about the luxury car being sold, the house mortgage, the late-night arguments. My mother, once radiant and proud, now avoiding neighbors out of shame. And my brother, the man they once worshipped, had stopped posting on social media entirely. The polished smiles and perfect captions were gone. In their place, silence. But here's what surprised me the most. I didn't feel revenge. Not even satisfaction. I felt sad, because deep down I had never wanted them to fail. I had just wanted them to see me, to look beyond their expectations and realize that love isn't something you earn, it's something you give. Yet maybe this was the only way life could teach them that lesson. Sometimes, when pride builds a castle too high, the fall is the only thing that brings people back to the ground. I didn't reach out. I didn't mock or gloat. I simply kept living my quiet, ordinary life, the one they once thought wasn't good enough. Every morning, I woke up early, brewed my coffee, and sat by the window of my small apartment, the same spot where I once felt forgotten. But now, that silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Because peace, I realized, doesn't come from having more than others. It comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching. And as their world began to crack under the weight of their own choices, mine finally felt whole again. It's strange, watching everything you once envied begin to fall apart. You expect joy, but what you feel is clarity. That was the moment I understood something powerful. You don't have to destroy someone's world to rebuild your own. Sometimes you just have to walk away and let time do the rest. It had been almost 3 years since I last heard their voices. 3 years of silence, of learning how to live without the sound of my mother's calls or my father's instructions. I had accepted that chapter as closed, sealed by pride and pain, until one cold evening my phone rang, and everything inside me froze. The screen showed a familiar name. Mom. For a moment I just stared at it. My thumb hovered above the answer button, but I couldn't move. It felt like time had slowed down, dragging me back through every memory I had tried to bury, every insult, every tear, every lonely night wondering why I wasn't enough. The ringing stopped, then started again. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was softer than I remembered, tired, almost cracked. "And it's me," she whispered. We need to talk." There was a long silence before she continued. "It's your brother," she said. "He's in trouble." Those 4 words landed heavy, like a weight I thought I had already put down. She explained everything between broken breaths, the failed business, the debt collectors, the friends who had turned away. The same people who once praised him now avoided him. My father had fallen ill under the stress, and they were running out of options. And that's when she said it, the words that echoed with years of irony. "You were always good with people. Maybe you can help." For a second, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The same voice that once called me useless was now asking for help. I didn't respond immediately. My mind raced through memories like a film reel. The day they gave him everything. The day they watched me leave. The years of silence that followed. They had chosen him, and now life had chosen to teach them. But even as anger flickered inside me, another feeling crept in. Something I didn't expect. Pity. Because beneath her words, I could hear something real for the first time. Fear, regret. She wasn't calling from pride anymore. She was calling from pain. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the sound of her voice. So fragile, so unlike the woman I remembered. I wanted to ignore it, to stay strong in my silence. But somewhere deep down, that small part of me, the one that still longed for love, refused to turn away completely. The next day I drove past their old house. The lawn that was once perfectly trimmed was now wild. The windows were dim. Even from outside, I could feel the emptiness that had settled in. I didn't knock. I just stood there, remembering what it used to be like. The smell of my mother's cooking, the echo of my father's laughter, the way the walls used to feel like home. And then I realized something I hadn't before. They hadn't just lost money. They had lost themselves. They had built their entire happiness around one person's success. And when that crumbled, so did they. That evening, I called her back. "Mom," I said softly, "I'm sorry for everything that's happened. But I can't fix what broke between us overnight. I'll help where I can, but not because you need me. Because I've finally learned that compassion doesn't make me weak." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then I heard a quiet sob. "I know, sweetheart," she said. I know. For the first time in years, she called me sweetheart. I didn't return home right away, but I did visit a few days later, not as the forgotten child, but as someone who had found peace in their absence. When I entered the house, everything felt smaller, older. My father sat quietly on the sofa, thinner than I remembered. He looked up, eyes trembling, and said just one thing. "I was wrong." It was only 3 words, but after all these years, they were everything. I didn't hug him. I didn't cry. I simply nodded. Because forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it's just silence, the kind that says, "I've moved on." That night, as I left their house, I looked back one last time. They were standing together in the doorway, 2 people finally stripped of pride, left only with the truth. And I, the one they once dismissed, had found the strength to forgive, not for them, but for me. Because forgiveness isn't about letting others off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their mistakes. That unexpected call didn't just reopen old wounds. It reminded me how far I had come. I had been the invisible one, the forgotten one. But in the end, I was the one who learned to heal. I had driven down that road 1,000 times in my memories, but this time it felt different. The air was still, the sky painted in fading gold, and the house that once made me feel so small now stood quietly before me, almost fragile. It had been years since I last walked through that door. Years since I was told I'd never be anything. Years since I walked away with nothing but a suitcase and the kind of silence that follows heartbreak. But today, I wasn't coming back as the same person. The fear that used to choke my voice was gone. The shame that used to make me avoid my reflection had turned into quiet confidence. And the pain that once defined me had become the reason I was standing there at all. I took a deep breath and walked up the familiar stone path. The garden was overgrown, the once bright flowers wilted, and the welcome mat looked tired, like it too had been waiting for something that never came. When I knocked, I heard footsteps, slow, hesitant. The door opened and there stood my mother. For a second, she just stared. Her face carried new lines, her hair streaked with gray. But her eyes said everything: regret, love, guilt. "You came?" she whispered. I nodded softly. "Yeah, I did." She reached out, her hand trembling, like she was afraid I'd vanish if she touched me. "You look different." "I am," I said simply. As I stepped inside, I noticed the silence. The house that once overflowed with noise and pride now echoed with emptiness. My father sat on the couch, thinner and quieter than I had ever seen him. When he saw me, he tried to stand, but his body refused. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think you'd call," I replied. He let out a faint, broken laugh. "Fair enough." There was no anger left between us. No shouting, no accusations, just years of unspoken words hanging in the air, heavy but ready to be released. I sat down across from them. For the first time, there was no need to defend myself. I wasn't here to prove my worth anymore. I already knew it. The conversation started slowly. My mother spoke about how everything fell apart after I left, how they'd lost touch with themselves trying to hold on to an illusion of success. My father listened quietly, his eyes glistening but proud in a way I'd never seen before. And then he said something I'd waited my whole life to hear. "You were right to walk away?" The words hit me like a wave, not of sadness, but of release. For years, I had blamed myself for leaving, for the silence, for not trying harder. But in that moment, I realized walking away wasn't weakness. It was survival. "I didn't walk away to hurt you," I said quietly. "I walked away because I couldn't keep hurting myself." My mother nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I know that now. We were blind, too proud to see what really mattered." I smiled faintly. "Maybe you just needed time." We all did. The afternoon stretched on. We spoke about life, not the past but the present, about the small business I'd built, the people I'd helped, the lessons I'd learned. I didn't brag. I didn't need to. The peace in my tone said everything success ever could. At one point, my mother asked softly, "Do you still hate us?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of anger. Just understanding. "No," I said. "I don't hate you. I just stopped waiting for you to see me." She began to cry quietly, and for a moment, the roles reversed, the child comforting the parent. I reached out and held her hand. It was cold, fragile, but real. There was no dramatic music, no sudden forgiveness that wiped away years of pain. Healing didn't come in a single conversation. It came in the quiet truth that we had finally stopped pretending. When I got up to leave, the sun had begun to set. The house glowed in the golden light, not as a place of pain anymore, but as a symbol of closure. My father stood slowly and said, "I'm proud of you, son." I turned back, smiling. "I know, and that's enough." As I stepped outside, a cool breeze brushed against my face. I realized something then. I wasn't walking away from them this time. I was simply walking forward. I had come full circle. From the child who begged to be seen, to the adult who no longer needed anyone's validation. The peace I carried wasn't born out of revenge or triumph. It was born out of letting go. As I got into my car, I glanced one last time at the house in my rearview mirror. It looked smaller than I remembered, maybe because I had finally grown. That night I drove home in silence. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. I realized something beautiful on that drive. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming someone who doesn't need to anymore. And in that truth, I found the closure I'd been chasing all my life. Because when I returned, I wasn't the broken one anymore. I was the one who had finally learned to be whole, alone, but free. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I didn't plan to stay long, but there was something unfinished, something that needed to be said. Not in anger, not to prove anything, but because some truths need to be spoken out loud, not for them, but for yourself. The house was quiet when I entered the living room. My parents were already awake, sitting together at the table. They looked smaller somehow, not just older, but weighed down by years of guilt and silence. My father was the first to speak. "You look like you have something to say." I nodded, I do. I sat across from them, hands calm, voice steady. For years, I kept wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough. I tried to convince myself you'd change, that one day you'd look at me and see me. But the truth is, I was chasing a version of love that only existed in my head. Neither of them spoke. My mother's eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet. I used to think being the quiet one made me weak, I continued. But it didn't. It made me strong in ways you couldn't see. You taught me what silence feels like, and I learned how to turn it into peace. My voice didn't shake this time. I wasn't that fragile child anymore. You called me useless, I said softly. And I believed it for a long time. I worked twice as hard to prove you wrong, but no matter what I achieved, I felt like it didn't count, because I wanted you to see it. My father's hands trembled on the table. We were proud of you. We just didn't say it enough. I met his eyes. You didn't say it at all. You said it to him. Every time. And I kept pretending it didn't hurt. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't angry. It was honest. My mother finally whispered, "We thought he needed the support more." I smiled faintly. Maybe he did. But I needed something too. Just a word. Just to know you saw me trying. But you didn't. You called me a failure before my story even began. Tears slipped down her cheeks. We were wrong, she said, voice breaking. I looked at both of them, the people I had once wanted to run from, the people whose approval used to define my worth. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. You know, I said quietly, I used to dream about this moment, about coming back successful, throwing my achievements in your face. I thought that would make me feel better. I paused, breathing out slowly. But now that I'm here, I don't need to. My father looked confused. You don't? I shook my head. Because real peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from release. I didn't rebuild my life to prove you wrong. I rebuilt it to find myself. I leaned back in my chair, my tone still gentle. When you gave him everything, the money, the praise, the trust, I thought you were choosing your favorite. But now I see it differently. You didn't choose him over me. You chose the idea of success over love. And in the process, you lost both. That last sentence landed like a quiet earthquake. No shouting. No raised voices. Just truth. Sharp, clear, and undeniable. My father's eyes lowered. My mother covered her mouth, trying not to sob. I continued, softer now. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying this because I need you to know. I turned out okay. I made it without your help. And that's not pride talking. That's survival. My mother finally looked up. Can we ever fix this? I thought about that for a moment. The truth was complicated. Some wounds don't heal into what they were before. They just stop bleeding. I don't know, I said honestly. But maybe it's not about fixing it. Maybe it's about accepting it and doing better with what's left. My father nodded slowly, his voice trembling. You always had more strength than we did. I smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I just had to find it because no one else believed it was there. The three of us sat there in silence for a while. Not the cold silence of old, but the kind that comes after a storm. The kind that feels like peace trying to find its place again. Before I left, I stood near the doorway looking back at them. They looked fragile, broken in ways I couldn't fix. But for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for their healing. I forgive you, I said finally. Not because you asked for it, but because I need to move forward. My mother began to cry again, quietly, but my father just nodded. Slowly, deeply. Thank you, he said. I gave a faint smile. Take care of each other. And with that, I turned and walked away. The morning sun poured through the windows as I stepped outside. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow, like I'd been carrying their silence inside me all these years and finally let it go. For the first time, I didn't look back. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to. That conversation, that truth, that wasn't about closure. It was about freedom. Freedom from the need to be understood. Freedom from the weight of being unseen. They had heard the truth they never wanted to hear. Not because it was cruel, but because it was real. And I had finally spoken it without hate, without rage, without needing to win. Because when you've truly healed, the truth no longer hurts to tell. It just sets you free. The drive home that day felt different. Not because of the road or the weather or even the silence, but because, for the first time in years, that silence didn't ache. It felt peaceful. The world outside my window was painted in shades of gold and blue, the evening sun melting into the horizon. I rolled down the window slightly, letting the wind brush against my hand, and realized something profound. I wasn't driving away from them anymore. I was simply moving forward. There was a time when I believed peace would come the moment they apologized. That closure meant hearing them admit they were wrong. But I was wrong too. Closure doesn't come from others. It comes from within, from accepting that some people will never see your worth until you stop needing them to. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of what I wasn't. Not smart enough, not successful enough, not enough of anything. Every choice I made was an echo of trying to prove them wrong. But when I stopped chasing their approval, I found something better. Myself. I remember sitting alone in my apartment during those early years, staring at the empty space that used to feel unbearable. I thought loneliness was punishment. But now I understand. Loneliness is where healing begins. It's in the silence that you start hearing your own voice again. When I reached home that night, I didn't rush to tell anyone what happened. I didn't post about it or replay every word in my mind. I just stood by my window, watching the city lights flicker, and felt a calm I had never known before. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was something deeper. Contentment. Because I finally understood that peace doesn't mean everything is perfect. It means you've made peace with the imperfections. I brewed myself a cup of tea, the same way I used to when the nights were long and quiet, and thought about how much had changed. The person I used to be, desperate, wounded, angry, was gone. In their place stood someone softer yet stronger. Someone who didn't need revenge to feel powerful. Someone who didn't need validation to feel seen. Someone who finally knew the value of their own heart. And maybe that's the greatest victory of all. As I looked out the window, I found myself thinking about my parents. Not with bitterness, but with a quiet kind of compassion. I realized they were just humans too, shaped by their own fears and mistakes. They didn't know how deeply their words could wound. They didn't understand that love isn't measured by success, but by presence. Maybe they never will. And that's okay. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to no longer let it control you. It's about freeing your heart, not forgetting what happened. I thought about my brother too, the golden child who had once been the center of everything. I heard he was still struggling, trying to rebuild what he lost. And for a moment, I wished him peace too, because I know what it feels like to fall apart, and how hard it is to start again. I sipped my tea and smiled to myself. There was no grand ending, no cinematic reunion, no sudden burst of joy. Just a quiet truth that settled deep inside my chest. I had finally become everything I was meant to be, not because of them, but in spite of them. And the funny thing is, I didn't need their apology anymore. I didn't need their approval. Because the moment I stopped chasing love from others, I started finding it within myself. That's when I realized peace isn't a destination. It's a choice. A choice to stop reopening old wounds just to prove they healed. A choice to stop waiting for others to understand you. A choice to love yourself enough to walk away from what breaks you. I turned off the lights and let the room fill with the soft glow of the moon. It felt like life itself was whispering, "You made it." For the first time in a long time, I felt proud. Not of my success, not of proving them wrong, but of surviving. Of holding on when it would have been easier to give up. Of turning pain into something beautiful. Peace. And as I lay in bed that night, I thought of the younger version of me. The one who sat alone in that empty room years ago, wondering if things would ever get better. I wish I could tell them, yes, they do. Not because the world changes, but because you do. The people who once broke you lose their power the moment you realize you never needed their permission to heal. And so I closed my eyes, not with tears this time, but with gratitude. Grateful for the journey. Grateful for the pain that taught me strength. Grateful for the silence that became my teacher. And grateful for the peace I had found, alone but finally free. Because sometimes, the most powerful ending isn't revenge or regret. It's learning to smile again. Quietly, peacefully, and on your own terms. They gave him everything and called me useless. But life has a way of balancing things. I didn't need their money. I didn't need their praise. All I ever needed was to see myself the way I do now. Not as a failure, not as forgotten, but as someone who learned that peace is the sweetest revenge of all.